We're here to talk about the effects of the UK government review of the Brotherhood and the wider targeting of political Islam. And with me to address these issues, Toby Cadman, who is international law specialist and has extensive experience in international law, and has been served as counsel in a number of high-profile cases before the International Criminal Court for former Yugoslavia, for Bangladesh, and is hugely qualified in his field. We have Baroness Tonge, who is an indefatigable campaigner for the Palestinian cause, and who resigned her parliamentary party in 2012 in defiance of her views defending for the Palestinians.
The whip, not the party. I am still a member, but I do not take any notice of them in Parliament. I'm independent.
And we have Rosemary Hollis, who is, I think, one of the outstanding experts in her field. Let's start first with you, Toby, and an examination of, from a legal side, of the effect of the government review on the Brotherhood.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to address you all on what is a very important subject. What I can say is what my role in the review process has been, what my views on the review process, and where we take it from here. For full disclosure, I was engaged by the Cordoba Foundation to submit a written submission to the review panel, and what I focused on primarily was the manner in which the review process was established, its terms of reference, and what it could seek to achieve. And as I said to Abdullah before I started speaking, I could probably give my views in about 15 seconds. I don't really need that much time to go into the detail because it's a completely pointless exercise that was ill thought out from the very beginning. And couldn't possibly achieve anything other than embarrassing the government. And as we find ourselves 1 year after the review, still none the wiser, only guessing what some journalists have written about as to what the findings actually are. So one of the first things that we looked at was the manner in which the process was set up. And whilst it's called a government review, we took the position that it is an inquiry, it's just not a public inquiry. There was no transparency in the establishment. There was very serious concern as to who had wanted this review to be set up in the first place, and that there was clearly interests outside of the terms of reference of the review process that had caused it to be started in the first place. And one of the first things that we looked at were the two individuals who were effectively tasked with chairing the process. Now, not wishing to attack the credibility of those individuals in question, but if we look at any kind of a review or inquiry, it must have the same protections as any legal process of any fact-finding mission, in that those that are conducting the review have to act fully independently and impartially. When you have the current ambassador to one of the countries that has a vested interest in the outcome of the process, whether we consider the ambassador to Saudi Arabia to be one of the leading Arabists, as he is frequently referred to, it's not a question of whether he would be biased himself, but whether there is a perception of bias. And so that was one of the first concerns that we raised, is that in order for such a process to have any real credibility, those that were set to chair the body should be fully independent and fully impartial. We had a second member of the chair, second chair of the review process, who was on record as previously stating that the Muslim Brotherhood is at its core a terrorist organization. Now, considering that the process and the terms of reference were in fact to determine whether the Muslim Brotherhood in fact had links to terrorism, and the chair of the process has already publicly stated his opinion, the whole process was lacking in legitimacy and credibility from the outset. And so rather than focusing on the substance of the review itself, and we did go into some detail as to the substance of the review, we focused on the body which is tasked with undertaking this task, in that the government should have thought more carefully about their findings. Because once the findings are released, and we are led to believe that the focus of the review is not just the Muslim Brotherhood, but other organizations that are either affiliated, whether there is actual or perceived affiliation to the Muslim Brotherhood, those organizations had no opportunity to submit any written submissions to the review body, because they were not aware that they were under review. And so that was one of the concerns that we raised. We also raised the concern that the review is looking at the Muslim Brotherhood as a single entity, which again is highly questionable. That the process and what they were seeking to achieve was very, very generalized. And as I say, the other organizations that could form part of the review were never given an effective opportunity to make any representations. The Muslim Brotherhood was given an opportunity, the Muslim Brotherhood in this country was given an opportunity to submit to or to make representations to the body. But again, it was not a process, and the procedures that had been established were not what we would be satisfied with any other form of inquiry that was transparent, that enabled that body that would be affected by the review to respond to evidence that was put forward against them, and to be able to challenge the evidence that the body was going to consider. Some of you may have seen some of the comments that were made by one individual in particular, who had initially stated he was part of the review process, and had then subsequently stated that he had submitted a paper to the review body, when it was quite clear that the conclusion was not going to be that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization or that it's affiliated to terrorism. So this individual thought it appropriate to say, well, they may not be terrorists, but I bet they don't pay their taxes. And this really demonstrated the manner in which this whole process was being conducted in what I can only describe as a very amateurish fashion. And we had made most of these points very clear in our submission to the review panel. As we have seen now, 1 year down the line, still nothing official has been released. There have been a number of unofficial statements that have been made that shows that the findings are not going to be as strong as those that had pressured the government to hold the review in the first place. And so there has been certainly the perception that the report is being manipulated, that it cannot be released in this current form because it's not going to serve its original purpose. And that is obviously deeply worrying. What we would hope to see is whatever findings the review panel come out with, if it does implicate any organisation, that organisation would have an effective opportunity to respond to those. And it may well be that whatever the findings are against the Muslim Brotherhood or against any other organisation that has been implicated in this process, that may result in further legal ramifications, that those individuals would and those organisations may seek to judicially review the findings of this panel. And all of this was avoidable. The point that we raised in terms of the manner in which it was set up, the clandestine nature of the review itself, the external pressure, all of this could have been prevented by having a fully transparent public review if that was deemed necessary. Again, one of the points that we raised is if there is such concern as to the Muslim Brotherhood itself, why are no other religiously based organisations being subject to the same process? Why are we focusing just on Muslim organisations, Muslim charities? There is significant concern, and I don't think I would be alone in saying there is significant concern as to organisations that advocate in favour of Israel. There are Christian organisations, right-wing organisations that could equally fall within the parameters of what this government is saying there is a need for such a review. So, as I only have a minute left, but I'm happy to respond to any questions. My concern from the very beginning was the terms of reference, the manner in which it was set up, and that it was not going to achieve anything other than to alienate the very community that it should, in fact, be sitting down with and discussing a way to properly address what are potentially legitimate concerns as to the current environment that we face coming from the tail end of the Arab Springs and what we are facing now, what we've seen in Iraq, Syria, and of course what we've seen recently in France. The communities that are at risk are the very communities that are now being endangered effectively, and I think that is really the very grave risk that has been created by a shoddy review process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Baroness Tonge, can you address the politics of what's going on?
Yes, I was just wondering whether I can or not. And I think to do that, thank you so much, Toby, for that analysis. To do that first, I would like to say, just to put me in context, first of all, welcome to anyone who is from the Jewish Chronicle, who may be here in disguise as a concerned, interested academic, because they usually are here in some shape or form. And to say that these are my views, they're not the views of my political party. And to colour that, you have to remember that I am ethnically a Christian. My head is an atheist, my heart is an agnostic, and I'm a woman and a bit of a feminist. I don't, like Elizabeth I, I don't want to go into anyone's souls to look what their religion is. That is their affair, providing they don't try and persuade me to be of their persuasion. But one of the things I would say, and it has been mentioned twice this morning, is that I do wish somehow that the Muslim Brotherhood would change their name to the Muslim Brother and Sisterhood. I really do. It is way overdue, and you know, women form over half of the population in any community. We bear your children, we are the most important, and therefore, you know, we need to be fully represented and listened to. I have to say that, I just have to put in my all. Now, the reason this report is such a shambles is because they didn't think it through. I mean, nobody actually, I don't know what Rosemary thinks, but thought the Chilcot review, the report through. I mean, it's 6 years now, is it coming up to 7 years? They still don't know what to do about it. They still can't publish it. Look at the mess when they tried to set up the review into child abuse. We've had to go to New Zealand. You couldn't really get much further away from that to get someone to chair that review. So we don't have a very good track record on reviews in this country, or reports. And of course, the reason it has not been published, and I'm now talking as an insider at Westminster, is it didn't say what they wanted it to say. I mean, it's as simple as that. Because at the moment, if we have a foreign policy at all, and one of my criticisms of my own government is we do not have a foreign policy at the moment. We haven't had a foreign policy since Robin Cook died. Actually, could he even be Robin Hood? Robin Hood would be...
Oh, I don't know, we had an empire in between, you know.
No, but, yeah, you know, we just don't seem to have a theme to a foreign policy anymore. We're all over the place, except that, yeah, we follow America, but we're America's poodle, and a pretty stupid and useless poodle at the moment, it would seem. But we do not have a consistent foreign policy that is based on human rights and international law, and that is my big problem. So this report didn't say what the government wanted it to say, so it's not going to be released, in my view. I don't think it will happen. They're hoping it'll just go away. There's an election soon, and then they can blame the other government. You know, they always blame it onto the last administration. And one of the reasons it didn't say the right thing is, my contention is that we need justification at the moment for going for extreme Islamism, because Western governments, ever since the Iron Curtain came down, have not had a common enemy. When I was a child, it was Reds under the bed. They've no longer got a common enemy, and somehow the fight against extremist Islamists is that common enemy that will draw people together. And even on a domestic front, you know, the ridiculous terrorism legislation that is going through in this country at the moment, you've only got to walk around Westminster, and it's like being in a police state. You know, there's machine guns pointing down at the pavement. I often say to them, you're not going to point that at me, are you? And the police laugh. But I mean, they are there for real. And I cannot believe that this has happened to my country. I really cannot believe it. And there has to be a reason, and they have to have a justification. And I'm afraid, mainly gentlemen, some ladies, this is one of the reasons. We have to have a reason, and that reason is the fear of extreme Islamists and terrorism. And that is why, of course, very, very sadly, 9/11 was a gift. Now, I know there's lots of theories about, you know, how 9/11 occurred and who was involved with it, and I don't go into that. But it was a gift to Western governments, because they suddenly thought, here it is, this is what we need. This is the common enemy. We've got another war we can fight. So they immediately raced off, you know, 3 weeks, I think, Afghanistan, the Taliban had, before they started bombing Afghanistan. And that, incidentally, was the first time I got into trouble with my own political party. I stood up at a party conference and said, we should not be bombing Afghanistan. There is no point. If you want to find a needle in a haystack, you don't bomb the haystack. You actually go for them by other means, by intelligence means. But they did it, and the whole thing has escalated since then. So we then went for Iraq. You know, that was another cause célèbre. Yes, we must go for Saddam Hussein. And you know that my party and I certainly were totally against that war with Iraq. We thought it was pointless. We didn't see what it was going to achieve. But this is all built up so that we have this common enemy. And I don't know how Western governments are going to get out of it, quite frankly. I think it's very, very concerning to me, because we've made an enemy of, I don't know what the overall Muslim population is, but we're making an enemy of half the world. And I don't want that. I don't want that. And we're doing it at the instigation of the United States of America, who it seems do it because AIPAC tell them to do it. I mean, the power of the Israel lobby in the United States of America is now revealed to everybody. And when you made the point that we should be investigating pro-Israel and Zionist organizations in this country, yes, sure we should. Actually, I think we should be investigating a lot of Christian evangelical organizations as well. Certainly in America and certainly here, there are people who are absolutely gung-ho about what Israel is doing within the Christian religions. And to single out Muslims for this investigation, I think is a complete nonsense. And I think we've got stuck in it now, and I don't know how our government's going to get out of it. I really don't. The Americans probably don't want to get out of it. In fact, the Americans can't get out of it because what they are driven by is AIPAC, the Israel lobby, and the Israel lobby is driven by huge business and the fact that Israel is still sitting there as the United States aircraft carrier in the Middle East. You know, they are the presence, the Western presence in the Middle East, and have to be supported in all they do. So this whole thing, since I came into Parliament, when incidentally, I think one of the first talks I ever went to on the Middle East was from Rosemary Hollis. And the thought that one day I might be sharing a platform with you, Rosemary, is a great honour. So I feel honoured that I'm honoured to be sharing a platform.
I'm going to disagree with you, however, so be careful what you say.
You can disagree with me all you like. I said it was my personal view, and it is not actually just my personal view. There is an awful lot of politicians at Westminster who feel the same way and feel that we are being manipulated for the sake of big business led by the United States and Israel. That is my view, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
Rosemary Hollis, please disagree.
Okay, there's a couple of points on which I wish to disagree on specifics, but more to the point, I'm coming from a rather different place because I don't so much see myself as an activist as a mixture of the kind of analyst that gets employed by Chatham House and hopes thereby to inject some analysis into policy debate. I would say that not much of what I consider really strong and clear and incisive and well substantiated analysis does manage to get into the policy debate and the decision-making process. And latterly, I've been at City University, and my title is Professor of Middle East Policy Studies. I look at the engagement of the European Union, the UK, and the US in the Middle East, and how we are a part of the mix. Now, looking at this particular issue that we're supposed to address of the inquiry, the review, I'm disagreeing with Jenny Tonge that it won't be released. I think there's quite a compelling assessment in some of the media, including Asharq al-Awsat, that suggests that the report on the Muslim Brotherhood will not advise banning the group, but will acknowledge that the Brotherhood has ties to some extremist groups in the Middle East, and will call for more stringent restrictions to be placed on its affiliates, including charity organizations. British sources close to the investigation informed Asharq al-Awsat. And the British government could seek to impose some restrictions on Muslim Brotherhood activities and members in the UK, in addition to blocking the entry of foreign Muslim Brotherhood figures. Now, in that sense, the report, if it does look something like that, when it's issued, serves quite a lot of purposes. You can cherry pick from a very broad array of activities, individuals, and movements, those that you want to target specifically. You can maintain a certain level of alertness, give your population the impression that you're on the case, things aren't slipping by you, but you're discriminating in your inquiry. So I think something will come out, and I don't think it will be a total embarrassment for the government. However, I do want to say something about embarrassment. To publish revelations about links, informal or formal, between Muslim charities and individuals in Britain and the Muslim Brotherhood will uncover the amounts of taxpayer money that have gone to Muslim Brotherhood linked or associated groups in the name of funding quote-unquote moderates to counter radicalization. I would say 3-4 years ago. And another source of potential embarrassment, to hold back from designating at least some Muslim Brotherhood members and organizations connected to advocacy or funding of anti-Western, anti-UK soldiers, for example, violence, will cause embarrassment with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Something about the Hamas connection, which I think is where a lot of things are coming together for me. And maybe Toby Cadman can say something about this, but the fact that the European Court told us that the basis upon which Hamas was added to the European list of terrorist organizations was case not proven. Maybe further investigation, they said, would prove that there were direct links between Hamas and terrorist violence. However, it was put on the list on the basis of secondary sources. That undermines one of the arguments used against the Muslim Brotherhood, because Hamas is understood as a branch of the Brotherhood. Certainly Hamas has many Muslim Brotherhood links, and the Muslim Brotherhood has many Hamas links. Even if inappropriately so in the case of the European Union, Hamas is on the UK list of terrorist organizations, the US list of terrorist organizations, and so on. So do the Hamas-Muslim Brotherhood links therefore make the Muslim Brotherhood also a terrorist organization? Now, I suggest thereby hangs a lot of problems, because if yes, that association renders the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist by association, then the definition of a terrorist organization is equated with the use of violence in resistance to Israel. And does that not make the definition of terrorist a partisan position in the context of a foreign war in which non-violence is currently not promising any delivery from occupation? A third of my 4 points, the Saudi-UAE dimension. Should the UK government adopt the Saudi-UAE line on the Muslim Brotherhood if the substance of that line is about rivalry for authority and power in the Arab and Muslim world? Is that something on which the British government should have a position? In other words, is it the British government taking sides in an Arab and Muslim debate? Why not simply use existing laws against the use of violence in the UK against any foreign nationals or governments as criminal, but leave aside criminalizing on an leave aside criminalizing an ideological stance. Fourth and last point, the practical dimension. And here's where, as an academic, this announcement of this review was sort of a gem. Oh dear, they have got themselves into a practical conundrum, haven't they? Which at the beginning of my remarks I did suggest they could finesse to advantage. But anyway, is the British government equipped to delineate between all British Muslim groups and individuals on the basis of how they stand on the issues which divide the Muslim Brothers and the Saudis and the UAE in the Middle East? Is there competence on this? And where will it end? With the thought police? Alternatively, if it is a question of following the money trail, how practical is it to identify all people making donations to alleviate suffering in Gaza? Simply because that in some way helps Hamas. Is it practical to check where all donations end up overseas anywhere? Compare fundraising for the IRA in the US during the 1980s.
Absolutely.
In the Middle East, the Muslim Brothers are an umbrella for various and disputatious groups, positions, and individuals who identify with inclusivist, as opposed to Wahhabi Salafi exclusivist, notions of Islam. To brand all of these a terrorist organization would be to tell whole families and communities that they are a threat to the rest of society. This is to demonize a belief system. And I know that what's it called? Review. Those conducting the review have had it explained to them, had that explained to them about the situation in the region and the complexities of labeling something as diverse and complex as the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And they've also had it explained to them that in Jordan alone, the Muslim Brothers are split on the issue of Hamas, with some wanting Islam to prevail across both banks of the Jordan, and with some wanting to put the East Bank Jordanian agenda ahead of all others and wanting nothing to do with Hamas. So I think I've used up all my time, and that's my contribution.
Thank you very much. We have three really fascinating presentations. We've got 20 minutes left. Who would like to ask questions?
Can you, I would like to get a definition where, how can we say that somebody is extreme or terrorist?
A definition of extremism or terrorism.
Of terrorism.
I think that's buying into the problem.
That's it.
To even attempt it is to buy into the problem. I think that's more or less what we've all said. In the absence of an agreed definition, you get yourself in trouble. I would point to the counterterrorism legislation of the Terrorism Act of 2000, before 9/11, remember, which is already troubling enough in terms of trying to write into legislation a definition. The criteria by which an organization can get prescribed, such as potentially on the table with the Muslim Brotherhood, according to that act, is to focus on involvement in acts of terrorism, but also to give consideration to the nature and scale of an organization's activities, the specific threat that it, I suppose, or therefore they, pose to the UK, and the need to support other members of the international community in the global fight against terrorism. This was before war was declared on terrorism. This was in 2000, but that covers all your bases in terms of what is being pursued on the grounds of a terrorism label. It covers solidarity with other members of the international community with a similar set of concerns. It covers anything that poses a specific threat to the UK. And beyond that, it is the nature and scale of the organization's activities. So do you see why I think actually it's not going to get us anywhere to see if we can all come up with a definition of terrorism? Yeah.
Alan, please.
I actually raised in a previous one a thing about the media, and we have a situation at the moment where there is a rise, they say, of anti-Semitism generally, and there's a huge amount of extra protection for synagogues and for schools and all the rest of it. We've just seen also the death of 3 Muslims, perfectly innocent ones in America, and the huge disparity in the response of everybody in relation to Islam and Judaism. And really, I mean, in a way, this isn't a question, because to some extent you've already answered it, but it's really a question of how we tackle this disparity. It is a fact that the statistics have shown, and even the Jewish community admit, that the rise in anti-Semitism over the summer was due to the war in Gaza, which was a war against Hamas. So, if you like, we're going in full circle. And it is obvious that in the disparity of response to Jewish fears as opposed to the fears of innocent and moderate Muslims, that's going to actually increase their angst and their fears, and therefore increase extremism, because you've got these young men who feel particularly rather powerless. How do we change that perception generally? Because it's not just about government reports and things like that. It's about the whole media and the whole disparity in response to a Muslim death or injury or security as opposed to a Jewish one. Okay. And I speak as a Jew here, so, you know, for the Jewish Chronicle.
Could you answer that?
Yes, I would point out that an all-party group in Parliament has just produced a report on anti-Semitism and the rise in anti-Semitism. There was one about 10 years ago, and now they've produced another one. And you are quite right that they have a most curious way of looking at things. Actually, the fact that there was a rise in anti-Semitic incidents during the summer in July and August was mentioned, but they didn't dwell on it. They just carried on. And whilst they mentioned the murder, the abduction and the murder of the Israeli teenagers, there was no mention whatsoever of the Palestinian boy who was abducted and burnt to death. I mean, it was a very, very unbalanced report into anti-Semitism. And it's perfectly obvious to me, and I say it over and over again, that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it's amazing that it's not more, actually, than it actually is. Very, very minimal in this country. But it's on the rise because of Israel's policies. Now, that is wrong. Jewish people in this country are not responsible for the policies of Israel. But when people like me criticize Israel, I am then labeled as anti-Semitic. So the general public immediately jumped to the conclusion that, you know, if you criticize the state of Israel, and of course it does call itself the Jewish state of Israel, if you criticize Israel, then you're being anti-Semitic because you're being anti-Jewish. I mean, they are asking for it. They can't have it both ways. But in answer to your question, I think one of the things we should be doing, and I've said this about, you know, putting sanctions, suspending the EU-Israel Association Agreement, the big trade agreement. And I've said over and over that we should be looking at this to do it because they do not fulfill the obligations to attend to human rights and fair play and everything. But don't just do it to Israel. Do it to all the countries with whom we have an EU association agreement. Look and see if all of the countries are actually fulfilling their obligations within that agreement. And likewise, back here, if we're going to have all-party groups looking at anti-Semitism, let's have one to look at Islamophobia, because that is very much on the rise, and I think we have more incidents of that probably than anything, and what we can do to address it. So we're just not being even-handed. We're being dominated by the lobby all the time to do their bidding.
Right. Just is it strange to see that the Western governments, including the UK government, criticizing the Muslim Brotherhood, that they are extremists or hardliners, and on the other hand, we see the extremist and terrorist organizations who as well accuse the Muslim Brotherhood that they are too moderate and they are working with the Western government very closely. And my question is, such a review, the UK review on the Muslim Brotherhood, does it affect that the view that such a review might give the extremist or the terrorist organizations winning the case and winning the argument that there is no such moderate Muslim or Muslim communities, and the only solution is to use force and violence against the Western government and the Western people? Does this review reflect that argument, that this might make their argument more, let's say, tasty for the young people, the young Muslim people who will not believe anymore in democracy and in dealing with Western government? Okay, Toby, would you like to answer that? Will it radicalize?
I think there's a very real risk of that, and I think one of the, both in terms of radicalizing moderate Muslims, but also the approach of Westerners towards Muslim organizations. I think the concern that you have is ordinary people will look at this as, well, if the government feels that there is a need to hold a review of the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, there's no smoke without fire, and so it breeds that kind of response. And if you look at the popular press, you can see that that's happening to a great extent since the beginning or since the first announcement of the review. So I think from one side that is a real risk, but I think it also does fuel extremism, because the way that you're targeting the Muslim Brotherhood, there is this perception that there is no other way than to take a very violent response, as you've stated. So I think from both sides there is a very, very real risk, and I think that is one of the areas that we focused on in trying to address this. That it's not going to achieve anything other than creating those two extremes, both in terms of the Western approach and in terms of the moderate Islam approach. So I think you're right. It is very concerning from both sides.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I think echoing or picking up on something that David Hearst said in a previous panel about the changing landscape in the Middle East and how no state in the Middle East is fully functioning in terms of sovereignty anymore, and some of them are completely failed or consumed in war. And the Western players as well as other regional players, are heavily involved in these developments. And as someone who tries to make sense of this landscape, what I'm seeing is just one facet of globalization. We cannot anymore disconnect local politics from the rivalries that are going on in the region. And it doesn't just boil down to what Israel is doing to Palestinians. In a way, the irony is that in the region, the Palestinians are worse off than they've ever been. They have lost the support of the governments of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt, big time, because of the connection of Hamas to the Muslim Brotherhood. And in a sense, the realignment in the region puts Israel on the same page as some of the Arab governments, with a bigger concern that they all have with Iran. Whereas in Europe, yes, some young people are more active in support of the Palestinian cause, but only now are we getting into some research about what that says about what their agenda is. And meantime, you have Western governments who've set themselves up as the defender of their European populations against terrorism, who have cooperation with the very governments that are anti-Palestinian at the moment and anti-Hamas in the name of better intelligence. And you have members of those governments equating the rise in anti-Semitism with Muslim immigration to Europe. It's hugely complicated, but we're into a new ideological landscape in Europe, a new version of what it is to be European. And you have to go back to the Crusades to understand that historically, the distinction between the Europeans with a Christian heritage and the Arabs with a Muslim heritage was competition for empire. And this sense that multiculturalism is good has gone out the window, especially in the context of increased financial difficulties in Europe, when people are blaming all immigrants, and those that they can discern as different and not totally loyal. So I don't think we can boil it down to simple issues. We are in a very complex landscape, and the review of the Muslim Brotherhood gets to several of the points that are visible on that landscape.
So,
Britain always was praised that it was adopting very smart and clever foreign policy and diplomacy. I find it very difficult to understand your comment when you said that is Britain lacking the foreign policy these days, and till Robin Cook was the foreign minister. All of us, we know that is Robin Cook has served under the Labour Parliament, and after that, actually, new government coalition, Conservative and Lib Dem, actually, they are serving now. I can't understand actually who draws these days actually the British foreign policy, because all of us we know that is Britain was dragged to the war in Iraq, and it wasn't that is in the best interest of the British citizens. And now these days actually I find it difficult as well to understand that is the position of the British policy in Libya. They've decided to stand with one side against the other. I find it very difficult actually, that is who is responsible for drafting or drawing this the foreign policy. If it was the Labour, for example, now we are witnessing the Conservative and the Lib Dem. Just I need some clarification.
I think I said that in my remarks. Our problem is we do not have a foreign policy that carries any principled thread or ideal. If you remember way back in the days of Robin Cook, not Robin Hood, Robin Cook said that we would have a foreign policy with an ethical dimension, meaning that he wanted to see a foreign policy that was consistent in the way we dealt with countries, whether they were our enemies or our friends. There had to be a consistent thread and a principle. We've lost all that. And we lost it, actually, after 9/11. For me, that was the turning point. And I can remember...
He lost it on weapons sales, even before 9/11.
Well, maybe 10. He did. Yeah, maybe. It was being eroded all the time. It was being eroded all the time. But you mentioned the word crusades, and I can remember watching my television set after 9/11, the day after, and I can remember my late husband saying, George Bush was on, speaking to the world, and Keith said, any minute now, this man is going to mention the word crusade, and that is going to start it all off again. And he then started about the crusade. That Bush was the first one to bring back that concept.
This came up this morning.
It is. I mean, to me, it's so obvious that America wanted to sort the Middle East out, you know, to get it all under their sway so that they would be doing their bidding. And it hasn't worked. They've just created a bigger and bigger and bigger mess. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, for me, 5 years ago, were pussycats. I mean, I didn't think that they were a sort of pure organisation. They were Islamic, but it didn't connect them in the least bit with terrorism. They've been going for decades. When they were founded, 1920s, I think. And it wasn't until after we rushed to support the coup in Egypt after the Muslim Brotherhood took power in Egypt, and we rushed to support the Americans who'd supported the coup, which I think was, I mean, why do we keep doing this? We keep preaching democracy, and as soon as anyone practices it, we say, no, that won't do. So they had a coup in Egypt, and when Hamas won that election in Palestine, fair election, monitored by the European Union. No, that won't do, the wrong side's won. I mean, where are we going? I just find it so frustrating. I'm sorry, I'm going off at a tangent, sorry.
Question there, please, thank you.
Thank you very much. If taking on Rosemary's point that the report is very likely to be published, and also taking the worst case scenario that the Muslim Brotherhood is deemed as a terrorist body, and any groups associated with it, and I don't know how that will be proven in the UK, because there's no concept of a card-carrying member of the Brotherhood. And the groups within the UK are respected members of civil society. There are hosts today, maybe one of them, Islamic Relief, Muslim Association of Britain, may all become incriminated.
Middle East Monitor, all of them.
The question to you is, how should civil society respond in that scenario?
Well, I still have my doubts about it being published, but I think if it is published, you'll probably find it will be published the day that Parliament rises for the general election, which is March the 30th. I mean, it may just come. They're very good at doing things like that, really, really contentious things. They do it at a time when they feel people won't take very much notice.
But there's two bits to it. Something, I'm arguing that something will be published. I'm not arguing your hypothesis that it labels the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization because of the implications in your question. That they're not, I would be surprised if they're that stupid, because implementation would be a nightmare.
Yeah, but Rosemary, this is the whole problem at the moment. This is the scenario that anyone who has any association with anyone that the government might think has got links with a terrorist organisation is immediately suspect and labelled and vilified. I mean, we are really going through a very, very nasty time in British politics.
Toby.
I mean, I tend to agree. I think it will be published. And I tend to agree that what we've heard so far is likely to be in the report, that they're not going to go as far as prescription, but they're going to go with a softer concern. And I don't think that they'll wait until the end. I think they'll want to use that leading up to the election to play against fears from the electorate. But I do believe that it will be published. I think that there will be very serious concerns as to how other organisations are implicated in the findings, even if there are just statements of concern. The one thing that we have to think of is organisations, some of which have already been mentioned, if they are implicated in that report in any shape or form, whilst it may not go as far as prescription or any tighter regulation, it will inevitably have an impact on how they are funded by individuals and organisations, because are those individuals and organisations going to be concerned about funding an organisation that has been implicated in such a report? And we've already seen that with the HSBC crackdown on Muslim organisations, and I think we'll see some concerns with the way that this report is seen when it is finally released. But I think it will be released, and I don't think we're far away from the time where we will see something.
Yeah. How would a change of policy in Saudi Arabia affect the Jenkins report and how it's received? What if Saudi Arabia were to delist the Brotherhood as a terrorist organisation?
I think that's a very big if.
And I was intrigued by what you and I think somebody else here today, certainly in the last week, was saying about this phenomenon of a softer line on the Brotherhood and Hamas from Riyadh. But it's another step altogether, is it not, to remove someone from a list? I mean, this is part of our problem with these lists. It's one thing to get on it, and there's usually political reasons for getting on it. And that's certainly the case with Saudi. But it raises a new set of problems for these actors to take an organisation off the list. I mean, what's Sisi going to say to the king? So I would have thought, you know, this is something that the British authorities have in common with the Saudi authorities. I mean, you know, if something's difficult, fudge it.
I think they'll fudge it.
One final question, please.
Hi, my name is Maïsa Abdelatif. I'm Egyptian French. Actually, we've been discussing the problem. There is a great problem, and it's escalating, and it's getting worse, and it will get worse. Actually, it's a fight against the whole ideology of Islam and Muslims in Europe and in America and in the whole world. Islam is not a favorable religion to the West, as well as the Muslims' rituals or the Muslims' appearances are not very favorable. But actually what's going on in the West is an extension to where we come from. Actually, we Muslims in the West are not justly treated just because we are unjustly treated in our origins or in our countries. Like you say, the Jews here are very honorable because there is a state called Israel. It enforces its powers on all countries of the world. So we failed. We have dictators who mean to, or who intend to keep their people always inferior. So we're inferior in our countries and in wherever we live. Actually, we didn't feel that much before 9/11, definitely, and we're still feeling that getting worse and worse, especially after the Arab Spring, and specifically after the military coup in Egypt. So
what's the question? Sorry.
It's not a question. It's just a demand. Actually, it's a demand that we need to find a solution because it will get worse. And we're talking about generations now who are unjustly treated. It is there is a real social injustice in the West against Muslims, and there isn't any fair competition between Muslims and other people just because they are Muslims.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
sorry, we're running out of time. I'll just let Jenny come in.
Just
let me finish my idea. I just need to point out to the solution.
Yes.
We need to find a coalition, an international coalition that safeguards people unjustly treated in their country, whether they are Muslims or any other religion. I actually.
Vive la revolution.
Excuse me?
I said, vive la revolution. What you want is a people's uprising, right?
Yes.
The small people against the government.
But
look, we cannot do that.
But look, sorry to cut you off, but the way to do it is actually through the democratic process. The reason people always go on about the Jews, they have so much influence, they are so powerful, they do things.
They have
Why?
international
Because they are involved in the political process, they join political parties, they campaign, they deliver leaflets, they raise money, they work their butts off for the particular political party they support. That is the difference between them and a lot of Muslims. Yes, we've got a bit of representation, but not enough. We want Muslim people. They're citizens of this country. You've got to engage. And whether you like our form of democracy or not, you chose to come and live here, and therefore get on with it and influence us.
Okay. Well, on that note, we've vastly overrun our time. Thank you very, very much for our three speakers. It was an absolutely fascinating and informed discussion.